What if one of the most trusted rules in retirement planning was never meant to be a rule in the first place? For decades, the 4% rule has shaped retirement planning and inspired the financial independence retire early movement. But with today's market environment, persistent inflation, changing interest rates, and longer retirements, is it still the right framework? Or is it time to rethink how we prepare for life after work? Welcome to Inspired Money. I'm your host, advisor Andy. Last year, I had the privilege of having Bill Bengen as a guest on Inspired Money. His groundbreaking 1994 research became known as the 4% rule. Bill never intended it to be a one-size-fits-all retirement plan. His research answered an important question based on historical data. 30 years later, we're asking the next question. Is the 4% rule broken, or does it simply need to evolve? To help answer that question, I've assembled three outstanding experts who approach retirement in different ways. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Seeking Alpha. If you're serious about becoming a better investor, one of the best investments you can make is in a better research product. And that's why I use Seeking Alpha Premium. Instead of relying on headlines or social media, you'll get professional analysis, powerful quant ratings, earnings insights, valuation tools, and thousands of independent perspectives all in one place to help you make more informed investment decisions. Full disclosure, this is an affiliate partnership. If you decide to subscribe using my link, it helps support Inspired Money at no additional cost to you. As always, nothing discussed on this show should be considered personalized investment advice or a recommendation to buy or sell any security. Now is a great time to give Seeking Alpha a try because they're running one of their biggest sales of the year. Through July 7th, you can save $74 on Seeking Alpha Premium, $124 on Alpha Picks, or $173 on the Premium and Alpha Picks bundle. If you've been thinking about trying Seeking Alpha, this is the time. Visit inspiredmoney.fm/alpha. That's ALPHA. Now let's bring in our guests. Joining me today are three outstanding individuals. We have Dana Anspach back on the show. She's one of the country's leading retirement income experts, founder and CEO of Sensible Money, and author of Living Off Your Acorns, where she argues that retirement isn't one chapter of life. It's four. We have Jordan Grumet, Doc G, back on the show. He's a hospice physician, host of the award-winning Earn and Invest podcast, and best-selling author who has helped thousands of people rethink the relationship between money, purpose, and building a life they don't need to retire from. And then rounding out our panel today, we have Chris Mamula. He's a CFP, partner at Can I Retire Yet? And co-author of Choose FI. And he's achieved financial independence himself by retiring from his career as a physical therapist at age 41. Today, he helps others build wealth while designing lives around freedom rather than simply retiring early. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
So glad that you're here. Before we jumped on, we were talking about things that range from motorcycle riding to pickleball. And we're not going to be talking about that today. Today in Act 1, we're going to unpack where the 4% rule came from, whether today's investing landscape changes the math, and how the FIRE movement has shaped the way that we think about financial independence. In Act 2, we'll move from theory to practice, exploring flexible withdrawal strategies, today's biggest retirement risks, and what financial freedom actually looks like. Then stay with us for Act 3, where I'll sit down one-on-one with Dana to discuss her new book, Living Off Your Acorns. I actually have a copy right here. And we'll explore why retirement isn't one long chapter, but four distinct phases, and why learning to confidently spend the wealth you've built may be one of the biggest challenges retirees face. So let's jump right into it. We're going to get started with segment 1.
The mathematical foundation of the early retirement movement is anchored to a static rule that was never meant to be a universal law. The classic 4% safe withdrawal rate was actually backtested as an absolute historical worst-case scenario. It was designed around a very specific, rigid 50-50 asset allocation of common stocks and intermediate treasury notes. Crucially, this single number heuristic was modeled on a retiree exiting the workforce in October of 1968. This was a highly hostile economic regime, characterized by back-to-back stock bear markets and crippling severe stagflation. Relying blindly on this historical anomaly to manage your contemporary life optimization is a massive structural gamble.
Dana, get us started. When somebody tells you that they're planning to retire using the 4% rule, where does that conversation usually begin? And what do people misunderstand about it?
Yeah, I think, as we all know, the 4% rule was intended to be a guideline. When Bill Bengen set out to do that research, there really was no authority or no guidelines in our industry around how much can you safely withdraw. And the research shows that most people who have been good savers, their spending isn't linear. JP Morgan's data shows something called spending volatility, where you can see swings of 20% from year to year in the amount spent. And so the 4% rule doesn't fall neatly within that. And so we start that conversation by talking about these things and then approaching things from a cash flow based plan. How about we lay out the actual cash flows, which change dramatically as you have Social Security or pensions kicking in or spouses retiring at different times or auto purchases or larger vacations or smaller vacations or a vacation home or, funding grandkids' college. I mean, that spending is all over the place. And so we think there's a more specific way to approach it than just the 4% rule, although it gives you a broad starting place if you're far away from retirement.
Chris, speaking of cash flow, since you achieved financial independence at 41, how different has real retirement been from some of the neat assumptions that you might have in a spreadsheet?
Well, kind of to Dana's point, like life doesn't ever go according to your spreadsheet and how you plan. I originally started into the FIRE movement thinking that retirement was the goal. Before I ever even got there, I realized that wasn't the goal. So I never started with a plan of a strict retirement. Before I actually left my PT job, I kind of lined up a gig where helping out on the blog, Can I Retire Yet?, where I continue to write. And I ended up writing a book. And then just as time goes on, I ended up getting my CFP, and now I do a little bit of part-time work doing that. So you never know where things are going, but I would say the most we've drawn down in a year, the year we moved, and last year we bought a camper van, I think we spent about 2% of our portfolio. And most years we have still a positive savings rate. We're generally hovering around not saving or spending, but we're kind of in that range, but it's never been any percent, 4%, 2%, anything for more than 1 year in a row.
Yeah, 4% sounds extremely sustainable. Jordan, I know that you've written that time is our most valuable asset. Do you think some people spend so much time chasing the perfect number that they delay living the life that they actually want?
I think that happens a lot. And there are really, in my opinion, two big problems with the 4% rule. And it's not what you think. I don't want to argue about 4% versus 5% versus 3.5. I think the problem is we're using a mathematical concept to try to solve an emotional problem, right? So the problem, people think it's running out of money, but it's actually the fear of running out of money, which I think is one problem. And the other issue with the 4% rule is that it's rigid and no one lives their life rigidly. Just as Chris was talking about, you kind of retire with one plan, but then life happens and you adjust to life. And so for those reasons, we spend a lot of time thinking about the 4% rule, but I do think on some level it's time wasted. Retirement is a leap of faith. In other words, we have no idea if the past and the present are going to look like each other. We have no idea if the future is going to mirror the past. We have no idea what's going to happen to us. We have no idea if we're going to have some income that we didn't expect. Things happen that we don't expect. So I do believe people spend a lot of time thinking about the mathematics. And what they should really be thinking about is, what do I really want to accomplish in this wonderful time I have left? And then figuring that they will work through the economic steps they need to take as they happen. I mean, we're actually all pretty flexible. And if you get to the point where you saved up 4%, that proves that you're pretty flexible. If your net worth is that high, that you probably will be able to pivot when it's necessary.
Yeah, and I do feel compelled to share that Bill Bengen, in his book that released, I think last year, he did make some changes. He was saying, well, maybe it's a 4.7% rule today. Maybe it's a 5% rule. Many people can spend more than they think. But Dana, where do you fall on this, spending emotionally and dealing with the emotional aspects of spending versus the math? How do you reconcile that in a plan so that it works?
It's not easy. I know. I love what Jordan said. It is an emotional issue. And almost every retiree that we've worked with that's on the cusp of actually living off their acorns feels that fear. It's not a rational behavior. We may have run their plan through every kind of stress testing you could possibly imagine, and yet that fear is still there, which tells you it's not a mathematical problem. It's just a human nature that we like to see those balances go up. We like to see our net worth statement. And so there's that scariness in drawing it down. And so having those conversations helps. I do think retirement is so much more than money. And a lot of the research shows that people worry about the financial side far more before retirement. You talk to those same people 2 years after, and that's not so much on their mind. They've made it through that transition. That flexibility is, as Jordan said, is just so key.
Well, not surprising that there is fear about the unknown. And once you've made the transition, you start feeling a sense of familiarity and a sense that it's doable. So let's move on to segment 2.
The modern economic landscape of June 2026 presents a hostile departure from the 20th century historical baselines that built traditional retirement models. For over 3 decades, investors benefited from a long secular decline in interest rates and moderate inflation volatility. Today, your early-stage portfolio faces a combination of historically elevated equity valuations, highly volatile bond yield dynamics, and persistent core inflation. When you execute a static withdrawal equation under contemporary constraints, you rapidly accelerate nominal portfolio depletion. You are exposing your net worth to sequence of return risk, dramatically increasing the mathematical probability of premature portfolio exhaustion.
Chris, what do you think? Is someone retiring today facing a very different market than someone who retired 20 years ago and therefore needs to change the way they think about their retirement planning?
I mean, I think like when interest rates go up or down, that's going to affect how much income you're going to have. And when valuations are up and down over longer periods, like you should probably suspect higher or lower returns. But we really don't know. And I think we spend so much time looking at back-tested data, but nobody's going to go back and have those same periods because they're in the past. And then we do so much projecting the future, but you really can't project the future. So, I mean, I really, in my own planning, I'm not really using the 4% rule other than more so like as a double check for my own math of like, if I put in a plan into software and it has like a 10% withdrawal rate to start, barring some weird circumstance, like probably I made a mistake with data entry. So I use it like that as a double check, but I'm really not talking to clients about the 4% rule at all. When I do use it actually, is the idea like earlier people who are accumulating, where I think this is really valuable. And it is kind of a little bit of a double-edged sword because people then will anchor to 4% or whatever percent you're using. But this idea of how much you need to retire is related to how much you spend. And that's where why this became so ubiquitous, I think, in the FIRE community, and people have latched onto it because it is a powerful concept. Because most things you read, they say like you'll need 80% of your income to replace, or 60%, or some number of your income. It's all related to your income. And if you use this 4% rule, and then the inverse of that is you need some multiple of that to be financially independent, I think that's super valuable for people because it totally dissociates spending from how much you need to retire. So like I always use the example, if you have 2 identical twins and they have the same interests and the same background and everything, but one becomes a school teacher making $50,000 and the other an orthopedic surgeon making $500,000, does it make any sense that the orthopedic surgeon has to have 10 times as much to retire, or like can they choose like to continue to live the same lifestyle and be friends and like have the same hobbies? So like it's just kind of nonsense. So that's where I think the 4% rule and that inverse of it can be very valuable.
Good perspective. Dana, sequence of return has always mattered. Does it matter more when starting retirement and the stock market is highly, it has high valuation?
Well, those are really two different things. I think, the research has shown sequence of returns risk is greatest in the 5 years leading up to retirement and the first year of retirement. We look at what we call that retirement red zone. And even in our planning, we'll note when the client is past that red zone point, maybe, they retired early and delayed Social Security claiming. And now they've been retired for many years. Everything's gone fine. Social Security's beginning. We're past that riskiest point. It doesn't mean there's zero risk going forward. It just means I'm not so concerned that a big market drop is now going to have the impact that it would have earlier. That's different than equity valuations. And equity valuations, we all refer to the S&P 500, but if you have a very diversified portfolio that also includes international, you're also using small cap, you're using value, I don't think it's as big of a concern. But if you're, all S&P 500, you have very concentrated risk that maybe people aren't really aware of the level of risk that's in that portfolio. And so then, yes, it's a bigger concern.
Jordan, what are your thoughts?
It's funny. We talk about sequence of returns, and my first thought is this. First and foremost, maybe you're a big fan of Die with Zero, Bill Perkins, or Ramit Sethi and Living Your Best Life. But the first thing I think about is this idea that we are not what we spend. In other words, I do not believe that happiness equates to high spending. I know a lot of people think having great experiences which cause money make you happy. But I really think actually what makes us happy is becoming better versions of ourselves. And a lot of times you can do that without even spending money. When you look at it that way, then you realize that we're really just looking at what could be a non-emotional issue. Like there are so many things you can do if you happen to be stuck in a bad sequence. If you're a 60-40 portfolio, you might just decide to spend bonds for a few years, and that might be your answer. Maybe you were worried about this so you had more cash available in the first place. Maybe you decide that living my best life really doesn't depend on how much money I spend, and I can just cut down for a few years. I mean, it is ridiculous to think that one thing, sequence of returns, handcuffs you from making all these other possible changes. It just isn't reality. And when you let go of the importance of spending as a cause of happiness, you realize that there's lots and lots of leeway to do what you want to do. So maybe in that first year or two, you don't go to Europe for a month. You do a staycation and just go hang out in the city, stay at a nice hotel and explore the city for a few weeks instead. And it just costs you half. That's it. Easy enough.
Right. There are many, many variables in a plan. And some of those things you can control and you can adjust and you can be flexible. Can you speak a little bit to the point that with market uncertainty, a lot of people have they're impacted differently psychologically, I think, once they're retired because they don't have the paycheck to provide that cushion.
Yeah, I mean, listen. Anyone can solve accumulation. All you have to do is keep making money and keep investing it, right? Anyone can do that. Good markets, bad markets, you never have to touch your portfolio because hopefully you're making enough not only to save, but to cover your monthly spend. I do think it becomes awkward once you start decumulation, once you stop having your regular paycheck, at least that comes from an employer, right? If you're really worried about it, you can create a paycheck from your assets if that's really a big concern for you. But psychologically, I've even faced that myself because my wife stopped working last year. She's now been retired a year. And for the first time ever, we had to start spending down and liquidating assets and doing all those things we had never done before. But I will tell you, I know lots of people have gone through this. And once you do it for a few years, you really stop worrying as much. And again, I think you recognize your own ability to be agile and to change. Once you go through a few bad years and you're like, oh yeah, I could just spend a little less, or, I could liquidate one asset versus another, which isn't doing so bad. You start realizing, it's just not that big of a deal. You've been incredibly impressive to get to this point where you could retire. why wouldn't you continue being impressive?
Chris, any advice to that transition point? It sounds like once you're retired, you start feeling better because you start understanding, oh, I am okay. But
Yeah,
just that transition point when you're not so sure. Any advice for people?
yeah, I think this is where good planning comes in, right? So again, in addition to the fact that nobody spends linearly 4% every year or any percent, you also don't have to have 50% in the S&P 500 and 50% in bonds. Like you can kind of do some matching of the duration of when these assets are going to come due to when you're going to need at least your fixed expenses. So like having a year or two of cash, and then maybe some like a bond ladder or an intermediate bond in that bucket that's going to not fluctuate nearly so much. And then once you get beyond 10 years or so, give or take, depending on how big your portfolio is, you can have that money in the market, and it's really what it does in the market doesn't really matter because you're shielded. And so, that's where good planning comes in, and you can eliminate a lot of that stress because you shouldn't be exposed to the market if you're going to need that money in the next couple of years.
Dana, what do you think is the biggest retirement risk people may be underestimating today?
Biggest risk that people are underestimating? Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, there's some unique risks, such as being underinsured on a major asset like your home, that I think we've encountered with some of the fires in California in the last few years, where people's property values had gone up, but they, hadn't revisited with their insurance carrier. That can be a big setback. There's a case that we had come across. It wasn't our client, but through a vendor, where they had almost $700,000 out of pocket to repair a home and that amount wasn't covered by insurance. That's you talk about sequence of returns risk. That's like a sequence of spending risk that could really hit someone hard. So I would say that's something that doesn't get a whole lot of focus that probably should. Outside of that, I think it's some of the things that Jordan alluded to, like feeling lost, not spending the time on that sense of purpose, not pursuing intentionally what lights you up and what you feel shiny about, what you're curious about, really being intentional, which is what I love about Fritz Gilbert's the Retirement Manifesto blog, is, he journaled his own journey on this and was so intentional. And it's really changed the way I think about it. And I appreciate that, of like realizing, like, if I don't give this some thought, I will be one of those lost people one day. And I don't know how much intention people put into that, but it's super important.
Great points. Let's move on to segment 3.
The obsession with achieving a single, magical net worth number has transformed a simple mathematical heuristic into a rigid, quasi-religious dogma. For many young professionals, the extreme frugality required by the early retirement movement is actually a subconscious coping mechanism for corporate burnout rather than a sustainable, long-term wealth strategy. When you finally cross the financial finish line, the sudden loss of identity can trigger deep psychological distress. True financial freedom quickly devolves into constant capital preservation fear. Your infantile nervous system gets permanently trapped in a scarcity mindset, mistaking strict wealth hoarding for genuine life optimization and relational safety.
Jordan, one of your central ideas is that many people don't want to retire. They want to escape. Can you explain the difference?
Well, here's the thing. I think that people have this dream of how they want their life to be. And a lot of times we don't even say it out loud. There are these things that excite us, these things that interest us, these passions. And I think instead of pursuing those, a lot of us start thinking about, well, I can't do that until I have enough money, right? I don't have enough money. I don't have enough wherewithal. And so the idea is, well, let's work on the money first, and then we'll get to those life dreams or passions. Fast forward many, many years, and you actually start getting to that money number. Instead of being relieved that then you can go use that money as a tool to do the things you want to do, a lot of times we get afraid, scared. Money becomes kind of a mirage. It's something we can hide behind, as opposed to doing the really hard emotional work of becoming the people we want to be. And we almost get stuck in this place of scarcity. Wait, I don't have enough money, that we never even let ourselves attempt to do these really scary, important things to us. And so I think it becomes an excuse, and it becomes much easier to contemplate one of two things. The first thing you contemplate is loss aversion. So you're like, well, my net worth goal, my 4% rule told me I need 2 million to retire. And I just hit 2 million. But then the next day, the stock market went down a little bit and I don't have 2 million. I have 1,990,000 instead. And so loss aversion, you become doubly afraid. And so you're no happier because you're just afraid you're going to lose what you have. The other side is that you become bored. You're like, well, I could kind of start doing those life things that I wanted to do, but that's really, really scary. So why don't I just double my goal? Like maybe 2 million isn't enough and it should be 4 million. And now I have something I can put my mind to, and I'll go back to work and I'll do one more year. And that saves me the fear and anxiety of actually trying to live with the life we want to live and use that money as the tool, where the goal is actually to live a good life. I think that's scary. I think a lot of people don't want to think about what purpose looks like in their life. I think they're afraid of failing. They're afraid of saying the quiet part, right? The thing that they always had a passion or fear about. There's a lot to lose and there's a lot at stake. And wow, I've been doing a really good job of making money, and that kind of gives me some status and makes me feel good. Why would I ever leave that?
Well, I love your book, The Purpose Code, because it can feel like such a big question to ask oneself, and it can be really intimidating. Chris, can you share a little bit about how your retirement has evolved? Because you retired as a physical therapist. You mentioned going back and doing some financial planning for clients. So talk about how financial independence, made your life more fulfilling and isn't just about stopping work.
Yeah. So, I mean, I started like FIRE was the goal, retirement was the goal. And then I definitely started to feel that scarcity. Like you feel it in your chest, and like, cause you're a natural saver, which is why you can save 50%. It feels good. And it was easy for us. And then you have to think about spending it. So my original plan was, I was a physical therapist. I knew worst case scenario. I worked outpatient orthopedics. So a lot of kids coming after school, people coming after work. I could get a part-time job working a couple evenings a week. That was my plan. And then, like I said, I fell into these writing projects, and I found that I didn't miss being a physical therapist at all. And I like these things much better. And I was starting to make a little bit of money, and we got through that early sequence. The market went up a lot the first couple of years. And then I just kind of kept following my curiosities, I guess, and my interests, and got the CFP, not even know if I would practice. It was more for my own interest, and then fell into a really cool opportunity to do very limited part-time planning. And so, yeah, just things keep changing. And I couldn't have predicted any of that.
Dana, many lifelong savers can struggle to switch from saving to spending. Why is that transition so psychologically difficult?
I think what Chris just alluded to, the people who make good savers, there's almost like this badge of honor to being frugal, to getting a good deal, to watching those balances go up. It probably gives us dopamine, just like social media. And so, we in a sense can become addicted to that, to the net worth number. I've had clients who log everything into, it used to be Mint, now it might be Monarch Money. And they're like, look at my number, look at my number. And, that's not really what it's all about, especially when you're shifting to spending. It's how much cash flow can you generate? What do you want that cash flow to do for you? What's the life that you want to live? And it's just that fear. We are at our root, the lizard brain takes over, and that fear takes hold of us. And it's hard to work through that sometimes.
If I could just add one little thing there. We were talking before, like, I don't do really dangerous stuff like pickleball, but I'm like a backcountry skier and a mountaineer. And so, like, I think like just shifting the focus, like I think a lot of people see like continuing to work is the safe option and having more money is the safe option. And then quitting is like this big, fearful, risky thing. Whereas like, because of that adventure sports, like I really look at risk as a balance of like, if you want to be totally safe, just sit on your couch, but then you're going to never have these experiences. And you also, like, if you sit there long enough, you start having health risks and all these other things. So it's really about like managing risk of like, what things are you not willing to lose or, put at risk? And then like, how can you modify the risks to allow you to do the things you actually really want to do? So like one part, I guess I didn't answer in your original question, my daughter was 4 when I left my job. And like, I knew like, I'm never getting that back. And like, I think a lot of people don't appreciate the risk of that. And so like, I could always, I guess not always, like cancer or something could happen, but I could always go back to work, if not as a physical therapist doing something else, but my daughter's never going to be 4 again. And so I knew I would never regret that. And I can say now, looking back, that I absolutely do not regret that.
I want to address this idea of risk. In this current audience here, in this panel, we have some very experienced financial planners. I would ask you, how many people that you've helped and taken care of who had a good understanding of the 4% rule, who understood financial independence, and who met with you regularly and paid attention to their asset allocation enough to understand what the words asset allocation means, who understood enough to put a little money away in a 401k or maybe a Roth, the people who paid attention to that kind of stuff and come and see you, what percentage of those people without extremely extraordinary circumstances ran out of money?
Dana?
1, but it was an extreme and extraordinary circumstance. Nobody's else has ever even come close.
And could they have planned for that? Like if they had done a safe withdrawal rate of 3% instead of 4%,
it had nothing to do with withdrawal rates. It was constant extra withdrawals for one particular adult child and constant warnings over a decade from us going, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Like, you are going to run out of money. That was the only case. And I could clearly see it was emotional, something with that particular child. This person felt compelled to continuously give them money. So I'll never understand, what may have happened when they were younger that caused that. But it was a very unusual circumstances. But no, never have we seen anyone even come close.
I wasn't sure if the question was supposed to be rhetorical, but it's true. Very few instances where we have a client that's running out of money. I think in my experience, there was just one where there was one spouse that just loved to spend. She really paid no attention to, monthly spending and how much she had. Her answer was always, God will provide for me. I don't need to worry about the numbers. Yep. I'm just going to spend. And we would always have talks with her. We're like, we appreciate your faith. That is good. But you do need to pay attention to your balance sheet. You can't just go spending without even looking at what you've got or your bank account. And that was always a challenge.
The other thing I will add to that is, a lot of the research has shown that it's that fear of the end of life healthcare expenses that often keeps people, wanting to hold back. Now, that is what my understanding is it's a low probability but high cost event. What I mean by that is most of us will need some form of care that's likely going to be quite affordable within what we already have because we're not spending on entertainment and travel and some of the other things. But there's a small number of us who will need extended long-term memory care that is very expensive. And so people have that fear. And so having a really solid plan of how that expense might be covered if it does happen to you, maybe can help alleviate, some of that fear so that there's more freedom in the interim years.
Yeah, and believe it or not, end of life spending is a plannable, solvable issue for the most part. Not simple, but plannable and solvable. And people also forget that we actually do have a safety net in this country. So people who run out of money because of long-term care actually end up using Medicaid. Often they end up staying in nursing homes where the person next to them was paying $15,000 or $20,000 a month for the same care, and they get it through Medicaid. The downside is you have the risk of basically bankrupting a partner to that person, but there are also ways to kind of solve and work around that too. So even the worst case scenario, there is some actual backup, and that's only in a very small percentage of people who either don't have the assets, don't have long-term care, aren't living in a continuity of care type situation, and don't have help from their family, right? So it's a very small percentage of people who really end up falling into that position.
Yeah, this has been a very thoughtful discussion. I think that we can clearly see that the 4% rule can be a helpful place to start, but it's probably not the whole retirement plan. So the next question is, how do you build a retirement strategy that's flexible enough to adapt as markets change, life evolves, and your needs shift over time? That's where we're headed next. It's one thing to understand the 4% rule. It's another to build a retirement plan that works in the real world. If you're just joining us, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm your host, advisor Andy. In this part of the show, we're moving from theory to action. Together, we're going to explore how to build a retirement income strategy that can adapt to changing markets, inflation, and life's inevitable surprises. More importantly, we'll focus on what you can control and tune out the noise that often distracts investors. Before we wrap up the panel, I'll ask each of our guests to finish one simple sentence. A successful retirement isn't about blank, it's about blank. So they can think about that before we get to the end. I can't wait to hear how each of them answers, and then stay for Act 3 when we'll sit down one-on-one with Dana Anspach to discuss her new book, Living Off Your Acorns. We'll explore why retirement isn't just one chapter of life, but 4, and how that insight could change the way that you plan, spend, and enjoy retirement. Let's continue the conversation and roll segment 1.
Fiduciary wealth management must move past static formulas and embrace a dynamic spending model. To survive modern structural volatility, investors need a proprietary framework called the adaptive withdrawal audit. This systematic approach discards rigid withdrawal rates in favor of 3 flexible parameters: real-time sequence of return mitigation, adaptive inflation smoothing, and floor and ceiling spending guardrails. By establishing variable rules that adjust in real time to volatile market performance, you protect your principal during drawdowns. This allows you to safely maximize your lifetime consumption smoothing without compromising your multi-generational wealth legacy planning or destroying your emotional peace of mind.
Dana, you've written about flexible spending guardrails. How do those help retirees protect their portfolios and their peace of mind?
I think, we want this plan. And I think of it like graduating from college. And imagine you're trying to put a financial plan together for the next 30 years of your life. It's going to be impossible to get even close. Now, I do think there may be less variables that change when you're on the cusp of retirement and planning for the next 30 years, but still, there's no way you can sit down and then chart out this path. You need to be constantly updating it. And so to me, this idea of setting a 4% rule or, a set amount that I'm going to need each month is kind of a folly. If you plan every single year and then every year we have the new account balances. Now we know what they are this year. And now we're updating what you can withdraw. And the next year we're doing it again. And now we're updating and re-stress testing. Then you're constantly dynamically changing. And if a set of conditions like the Great Depression were to materialize, you're going to have plenty of time to make adjustments, but there's no reason to start day one as if it is the Great Depression right now. And so to me, that's the value of this flexible and dynamic strategy. But it's hard to set ahead of time an exact set of rules because we don't know how all those variables are changing. So every year we need to update fresh. What are the balances? What are your spending needs? What has inflation been? And then it dynamically adjusts naturally just through the planning process.
Chris, talk about your planning process. And do you find that planning for a younger person is more difficult just because they have a much longer time that they're planning for, that you don't know what's going to be happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like if you look at a Monte Carlo and you can see like a probability of which way things are going to go, and it looks kind of like a cone coming out, and so it might run out of money in 20 years, or you might end up with $10 million for like a 30-year retirement. And then if you take that out to 60 years, it's almost kind of nonsense. And yet if you look at like the outputs, it'll say like you have an 87%, not 88, not 86, but 87, and it gives you down to like the median balance down to the $1. And so what I talk to people about is that should probably be rounded to about, for especially an early retiree, maybe $100,000, and maybe the closest 5 to 10%. But like the thing to understand, and I think I heard Michael Kitces talk about this first, it's always the chance of success. And so the opposite of that would be the chance of failure. It's really your chance of having to change things. And so that's basically 100%. Like everybody's going to change things. And just kind of where I think the guardrails and things like that come in is it is helpful to see like how much do you have to change. And so to be able to look at that. But again, kind of like the 4% rule, nobody that I know is following that. I can't imagine. So I think it just helps as a framework to give some perspective.
Jordan, does having a flexible plan reduce financial anxiety as much as having more money?
I think it does. And, here's the wonderful part about working with someone like Chris or Dana. There are so many different good plans. What the work, I believe, of a good CFP is to match the personality of the person with the plan that'll work for them. So like, I'm pretty freewheeling. I'm pretty comfortable with taking 4.5 or 5%, rolling the dice, not worrying about it, starting there and adjusting as necessary. I'm even comfortable with not having specific guardrails because it just doesn't worry me that much. But you might have someone else who's very conservative, who's like, I want a monthly paycheck and I want to know where it's coming from. So for them, it might be a mix of Social Security and annuities. Everyone is different and all of these plans can work. The key is either figuring it out yourself or getting the right help so we can match a plan for you to your personality. Because what we really want is something that's going to allow you to sleep at night and mostly pursue your joys and interests. And if we can match the personality to the right financial plan, that's the goal. And I don't do that for a living. Everyone else on this call in this panel actually does that for a living. I don't. But from my experience working with them and talking to other people, that's exactly what a good planner does, is they help you figure out how to sleep well at night while setting up a great financial plan.
Dana and Chris, I wanted to, Antonio had asked a question, and if I can see this on my screen, he says the 4% rule is usually judged by whether the portfolio survives 30 years. But if someone wants to leave capital to family or avoid large drawdowns, should the withdrawal rate be meaningfully lower? Any thoughts?
I mean, certainly much of that depends on the markets we're in, right? The withdrawal rate could be meaningfully higher in some markets and still leave a large amount of capital. There's always a trade-off in retirement between consumption today and the remaining balance you're going to leave to heirs. We like to talk more about gifting along the way. Now, if truly leaving a big lump sum at the end is important, then yeah, you're going to need to adjust the parameters of the plan, which is, as Jordan said, building a plan customized to that particular person. But I think when people are exposed to the idea of being able to gift when perhaps the younger generations really are going to need it more, they may not need those funds at their perhaps age 65 or 70 where they're likely to inherit. They may need them now while they're younger. And so could you build in some spending to still accomplish those goals along the way rather than let it all accumulate? And you get to see, the joy or the experience of whomever it is that you're helping. So I like to at least broach that approach.
Yeah, gifting is a great approach. Chris, did you have any thought?
I mean, mostly I love what Dana just said. Like we're talking about giving when it's more meaningful and giving with a warm hand. And so we're talking a lot about that. I mean, I'm not sure, I think in theory, people might want to leave something, but like this idea of like leaving a set amount, like again, these projections are so unknown. I suppose you could always buy a life insurance policy and then you could give exactly that amount. But again, I'm much more of a fan of thinking about like giving when it's more meaningful, really being more thoughtful. Because I think when you get to like the thing behind the thing of what people want to do, I don't think they want to leave exactly $250,000 to each kid or whatever. It's much more meaningful to give at a time when you have impact and when you can see the impact. And so I think if you have better conversations, that's a better approach to take, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll just underscore that I think it's very individualized. So clients will prioritize, what are your needs, what are your wants, what are your wishes, and where does leaving a legacy, leaving money for your heirs, where does that fall in your priorities? Because then you're trying to back into it and say, all right, it's part of my plan. This is important to me. And therefore, just like we've been talking about for this whole show, you want to be flexible, and you're going to build into your plan what kind of flexibility can you control, and when you're keeping your goals in mind. So let's move forward and go to the next segment.
The Federal Reserve has signaled a prolonged higher for longer monetary policy trajectory, reshaping the mechanics of fixed income returns. With the upcoming Federal Open Market Committee rate decision, the central bank's interest rate path will directly alter the foundational pricing of safe withdrawal assets, dynamic spending floors, and global portfolio alternatives. True market stewards do not attempt to speculatively gamble on daily rate paths. Instead, you must decode how these shifting macroeconomic parameters affect your asset location and your long-term tax bracket management. Understanding this monetary plumbing allows you to protect your capital long before active financial panic sets in.
Chris, you acknowledged earlier that interest rates are going to have an impact on your investments, but I've also heard people say, that's a lot of noise. I don't want to pay attention to that. I'm going to keep my investment approach simple and consistent. How does it influence your approach to investing?
Not much at all. Again, like I'm not really looking at like market conditions. Like when interest rates were really low, inflation was also really low. And then as inflation ticked up, inflation rates tend to, again, not perfectly be correlated, but move in the same direction. So I'm more worried about real returns. And I'm more worried about thinking about, again, having these fixed income options, whether they be cash or bond ladders or bond funds or whatever, kind of matching the duration of when you're going to need the money so it's not exposed to the stock market. And I'm much less worried about the returns on those. But it is, I think, associated, to a degree with how much you can spend, but that's not really a big concern because, again, I can't predict the future.
Dana, how should today's interest rate environment influence the way retirees think about income planning?
I agree 100% with what Chris said. Not all that much. It's, interest rates have always changed. If you have a solid plan, then you stick with that plan. There may be some, small adjustments that get made. I mean, if you have higher interest income, maybe you're paying more taxes, but that's just part of the planning process that you're going through. I like the duration matching approach that Chris talked about, where we're planning out the cash flows that are needed and you're having assets that specifically match those durations. The technical word would be asset liability matching. And in those cases, we had bonds paying almost 0%, but inflation was also almost 0% for almost a decade. And now all of those parameters have changed, but the planning process and the structure of the underlying portfolio, it hasn't changed at all.
If I could just add, like one maybe thinking back what I said and what Dana just said, like a couple of years ago when interest rates were 1% on a 10-year bond, there are times when things are so extreme, like the risk reward, maybe to short, like talking about that again, duration, like shortening that because there was a ton of risk. But so many people were worried about why would I put money in bonds because they're still anchored to how much money they lost in 2022. But you have to kind of understand that was such an outlier thing, and it was pretty foreseeable that interest rates had nowhere to go. Like they couldn't go any lower because they were on the floor. And so there may be extreme times where you might want to do things a little bit differently, but that still wouldn't alter dramatically what you're doing. Just looking at that duration and when things are just super, super risky.
Jordan, what parts of retirement should people actually control and focus on instead of worrying about what the Federal Reserve does next?
Again, I think a big part of retirement is spending your time doing the things that are deeply important to you. And so it's a bigger question of who am I, what's important to me, how do I want to spend my time? And once you can define those things, then you can look at the financial aspects. And sometimes you're going to want to spend more to do things that are important to you. And other times you're going to want to do less. But how do we even know how much money we really want in retirement until we know what a good retirement looks like? Like, how do I want to be spending my day? Is that something that costs money? Is it not something that costs money? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to be surrounded by? I think once you start focusing on those things, you all of a sudden see that there are alternatives You can have a high spending plan and a low spending plan, and then you can adjust them depending on what's happening in the market that day if you really want to. But the key is, what are kind of those essential things you want to do? I think your time is much better spent thinking about that stuff than the specific aspects of, even inflation versus interest rates. The thing about it is, again, we're really savvy people, and a lot of us hire really savvy people to help us. There's usually a good plan in place, or a plan we can make when things go in a direction we didn't expect. And so we're not caught in a dire strait. We're just changing things around to fit the current climate better. And I think that's fine.
It's a great segue into segment 3.
The final fiduciary verdict requires you to bridge the gap between quantitative financial planning and the qualitative pursuit of a meaningful life. To safely exit the traditional workforce in an era of structural macroeconomic volatility, you must establish clear, non-negotiable criteria to separate viable retirement plans from dangerous financial illusions. True financial freedom is not about hoarding capital or living in a state of continuous voluntary simplicity. It means mastering tax bracket location, understanding the medical realities of long life cycles, and designing a highly resilient portfolio built to survive any inflationary regime, ensuring your balance sheet thrives over a 40-year horizon.
Jordan, I'm going to start with you again, since you've mentioned purpose and some of the really important things that people should be focusing on in retirement, and then maybe not things that that are just obvious things for them to do. I want to ask you, how has caring for people at the end of life changed your definition of a successful retirement?
I mean, first and foremost, no one, and I mean no one, has ever looked at me and said, boy, I never made it to that net worth of 2 million. Like, I only made it to 1.5, and I'm really upset about that. No one ever said that. Almost no one ever said, I wish I worked more nights or weekends. When people get to the end of life, they regret that they never had the energy, courage, or time to do things that were deeply important to them. And so that's the real message I think the dying can tell us, that people die with regrets. And yes, I mean, a life well lived, there are always going to be some regrets. Maybe you didn't do more or didn't even have more. But in general, most regrets are manageable if you think about them before you're at the end of life. And so we have this golden period where someone tells us, or advisor tells us, or we divine that we have enough money to retire. So we have this golden period between when we retire and hopefully many decades later when we die. And that is a truly magical time. There are all sorts of abilities. There are things that maybe we never got to, people we maybe never spent time with, or parts of ourselves maybe we never developed. And we have this magical possibility of doing it. And if you let go of this idea that I'm going to succeed or fail, and just joyously jump into things you enjoy the process of doing, and meeting people who you like and connecting with them and building community. I mean, it is so exciting, this idea of all these wonderful things you could do. But to get there, you have to get over that mental roadblock of worrying about money, worrying about running out, worrying about all the risks of inflation and safe withdrawal rates and all that. You've got to take the leap of faith and say, I've hired good people. I've done a lot of the research. It's going to be okay. Let's move past that so we can get to the real boon. Like, we work so hard and made all that money for the boon of living the life we want to live. What good is it if we don't live that life? If we don't pursue those things, if we don't use that money to be who we want to be? I mean, that's the beautiful light at the end of the tunnel. And so many people listening right now have done such a good job of getting there. Now's the time to be less scared and more excited. I know it's hard to believe that, but it's actually the best time ever.
Dana, how do you weigh in on what separates people who simply survive retirement from those who are truly thriving in it?
It's really hard to weigh in on that. What keeps going through my mind is when I was younger, if you thought, oh, if I won the lottery, I go buy this fancy car. I'm not even a car person. Like, why was that even on my mind? I think because the media and messaging just made you think that's what you should do. And now, it was just sometime last year, there was a huge lottery, and we rarely buy tickets, but I bought tickets, and I don't remember the number, but let's say it was 300 million. And I thought, well, what would I do? And it was like, well, I would invest more in my business. Like, there's so many things I want to do to improve the things we offer to clients. And it was this light bulb moment of kind of what Jordan is saying. I'm lucky enough that I'm already able to work on those things. Certainly not at the scale of if I had 300 million of capital, but I am able to pursue things that I'm passionate about and, that I love doing, and I love building efficiencies, and I love helping people. And so it is the people, it's a roundabout way of getting there, but the people who thrive in retirement have figured that out for themselves. And that could be, watching the grandkids 2 days a week. For some people, that is very meaningful, and they're able to contribute to their family and the next generation in a substantial way. For other people, it may be getting involved in charitable organizations or a religious cause. It's different for everyone, and it's really figuring out what are those things. And I think that can be a great question to ask. Like, if you did win the lottery and you had all this free time, outside of the mainstream, I'd pay off mom's house. Yes, I would do that. But, what are the things that you would really do that would light you up?
It's great advice. Chris, we've kind of talked about the fact that when people hear financial independence, they think about leaving work. And you talked about financial independence when your daughter was 4. What does financial independence mean to you today compared to when you first retired? And what do you see ahead?
I love that question. When I think, this might surprise you because I read a blog called Can I Retire Yet? And like I said, I started off very focused on wanting to retire, thinking that was the goal. But kind of to Dana's point about the car, I think retirement is like something that it's like the focus of, if you look at any financial planning software and so much of the financial media and like getting to retirement. And like, I've kind of reached the point where like retirement, like, I don't know, like maybe someday I would want to retire, but I kind of foresee myself, like I love what I'm doing right now with my planning. I could see myself, I only do it 10 hours a week. I could see me doing it 20 or so, like as I reach a point where my daughter's older and I don't have the physical health to get out and do the things that I'm doing. But should you ever retire? I mean, that's your decision, but I would really question, like, why do you want to? Is it because you really want to retire, or is it because that's what you should do, or what the goal is according to society? And like Jordan mentioned, the book Die With Zero, I have a very love-hate relationship with it. I hate the math in there, but certain books hit you at a certain time. And I actually read that book laying on a couch at like, I can picture one passage, like it was like 3 a.m. when my mom was in hospice care. And there's a concept in that book about time bucketing. And there's just certain things you can only do at certain points in time. And that hit me really hard at that time. And I've really kind of incorporated that into my own life. Again, like talking about, like, there's only one time my daughter is going to be 4. We moved from Pennsylvania to Utah when I was in my early 40s. I'm a avid outdoors person, skier, mountain biker, hiker. And like, I'm not gonna be able to do that stuff at the level when I'm 65. So I have to kind of do it now. And there's other stuff I can do later. I can actually work more, assuming I maintain my mental health and, mental acuity. I can be doing planning when I'm 80 years old. I can do a cruise when I'm in my 70s. So certain things fit in certain time buckets in your life, and you can't go back and get those. So I really try to get people focusing more on that and kind of doing the things they truly want to do versus retiring because retirement's what you do.
Makes a lot of sense. Before we wrap up our panel, I'd like to ask each of you to finish the sentence: a successful retirement isn't about blank, it's about blank. Dana, you want to start us off?
Well, I'm probably going to say the same thing we're all going to say. A successful retirement isn't about money. It's about, to me, coordinating money with time, with purpose, and putting those all together.
Jordan, are we going to say all the same thing?
Kind of. My sense is a successful retirement isn't about spending, it's about living.
Nice. And Chris?
I would say it's certainly not about safe withdrawal rates. And I'll say it's about fulfillment.
Love these answers. Thank you. Dana, Jordan, and Chris, thank you so much for your thoughtful and engaging conversation. I know our audience has learned a tremendous amount from each of you. For everyone watching, we'll include links to our guests' websites, books, and podcasts in the show notes at inspiredmoney.fm/blog. I encourage you to continue learning from all three. Be sure to check out Jordan Grumet's latest book, The Healthcare Heist. Jordan, that's released?
It is released. It's out there in the world. It is about how third parties have bankrupted healthcare to the detriment of both patients and caregivers. It's something that's very close to my heart because one of the big reasons I burnt out from medicine as a doctor was because the system was so rigged and it wasn't helping the people it was supposed to.
What a huge topic. We have to get you back so that we can dig into the book. It's a topic that affects and impacts all of us. Everyone visit Chris Mamula at Can I Retire Yet? For outstanding resources on financial independence and retirement planning. Also check out the book, Choose FI. And Jordan and Chris, thank you again for joining us today. I hope that you both come back soon. Always appreciate you coming on to Inspired Money. You guys are going to drop off. Dana's going to stick around luckily she plays so much pickleball. A 90-minute podcast is no problem.
Andy and Jordan, it was good to see you. And Dana, it was great to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Bye now.
So we've spent the last hour talking about the mechanics of retirement. And now let's talk about the human side of retirement. This is Inspired Money. I'm your host, advisor, Andy. We explored the history of the 4% rule, how today's market environment has changed retirement planning, and what financial freedom really looks like. But here's the question we haven't answered yet. What happens after you retire? For so many people, getting to retirement is not the hardest part. Learning how to live in retirement can be. And that's the focus of Dana Anspach's newest book, Living Off Your Acorns. In this conversation, we're going to explore why the decade before retirement may be the most important years to plan, why retirement naturally unfolds in 4 distinct phases, and why one of the biggest challenges lifelong savers face isn't building wealth, it's giving themselves permission to spend it. Dana, welcome back. Let's dive right into the book conversation and start with segment 1.
Why do so many brilliant professionals spend decades building a fortune, yet completely fail to visualize the actual exit? Dana Anspach experienced this exact reckoning during a brief mountain vacation. It wasn't about a clinical numbers game anymore. It was about a deliberate lifestyle design. Many wealth builders assume retirement is a sudden, single destination. But data shows the 10-year window right before you step away is actually your most critical operational phase. This is your pre-go season, where you must transition from aggressive accumulation to strategic cash flow mapping. True freedom requires turning on the analytical light years before you stop working.
Dana, can you take us back to that mountain vacation in the moment that you realized retirement wasn't just a financial planning problem, but a life planning problem?
Absolutely. I remember it crystal clear. I was in Beaver Creek, Colorado, one of our favorite places to go. And normally after a few days off work, I'm antsy to get back and be working on something. And we were there just over 2 weeks, and I never got that feeling. And it was the first time toward the end of the vacation where I thought, oh my gosh, like this is what a joyful retirement could feel like. Out hiking in nature every day, just leisure time every day. Now, I did do some work on this trip, but it was at a reasonable pace. It wasn't crammed in where you're constantly looking at your calendar to make sure you're ready for the next thing. And so it was the first time I connected emotionally to the idea of retirement. I had done my financial plan every single year because I'm a financial planner and I don't want to be a hypocrite. And so, of course, I know my numbers and I know what's possible, but I didn't have any emotional connection to it. It was someday, maybe I'll work till I'm 70. And that was the first time where I began to consciously think about what my path might look like. Now, that was now almost 2 years ago where I had that experience. And it's been really interesting to see how my thoughts and path have evolved. But what that started was this just thinking about it in a more intentional way and realizing, how am I going to design this for myself in a way that's going to work?
So it's important for us to keep our eyes and ears open and really thinking to the future. One of the biggest ideas in your book is the pre-go phase, the decade before retirement. Why do you believe those 10 years are actually more important than the day someone retires?
Yeah, it's like the foundation, just like building a house, the time invested in doing the plans and the engineering work, that all has to happen before you can begin the framing. And so I think of that 10 years as the time where you're not only getting a handle on your numbers and understanding what's possible, that can help if early retirement is placed upon you. So a lot of the research shows that while people may plan to work till 65 or 67, often retirement happens several years earlier. So the planning is important to help have some contingencies in place for those kinds of risks. It also helps you prepare emotionally. The work that I've been doing of figuring out, well, how do I start by taking more time off along the way? How do I begin thinking about the things that light me up, and what, my identity is, founder and CEO and author, you know, how do I think about what it is beyond that and where my joy and purpose will come from? And that's going to take a long time for me. That isn't going to be one day there's work and the next day there's not, which I realize happens for a lot of corporate people. If that's your situation, you want to give yourself a lot of grace in that first early retirement period to do the work to figure this out. For those of us who have time to think about it ahead of time, I think it's just critical just to get your mind wrapped around it and begin looking and being open-minded about what that new time in life may be like.
So if someone is 5 to 10 years away from retirement today, those are some of the conversations that you think they should be having with themselves and maybe their spouse?
Absolutely. My husband just literally last week was like, so, what are your latest thoughts on retirement? Of course, he hears me talking about it all the time. And so we did have a conversation about it. And while I still think I will probably work and be involved in my business in some capacity till 70, we have a bit more of a cohesive plan now. It in some ways revolves around our dog. So our dog is 10 years old. And so we kind of thought, okay, we'd really like to spend summers. We're in Arizona, in Phoenix, Scottsdale. And so we'd really like to spend summers in the mountains. And so, but realistically, when is that going to be possible? Well, not until our current dog has passed. And so that started to outline a timeline for us of, okay, in the next few years, how do I intentionally schedule? I just did a remote work week from Beaver Creek. And so that was just like a little oasis for me of working at a reasonable pace. And then we scheduled a week in Hawaii later in the year. And so we're trying to be a lot more intentional about scheduling some of those things now, and then having a timeline. Okay, so when our dog passes, our next phase would be figuring out a plan where we can spend summers elsewhere. And then from 65 perhaps to 70, what would that piece look like? So I'm starting to segment it out so that I can be really conscious about what we want to do while we're able to, and then what the later phases may look like.
Yeah, that's really good. Are you seeing that more commonly? I have a client who, they had been planning more traditionally, okay, we're going to retire at 65, but they called me recently and said, oh, we talked about how we love going camping, we love going hiking, and last year they went on a big hiking trip with a couple of friends of theirs, and they came home and said, our realization was that we need to take these hiking trips now while we're physically capable, because their friends are a little bit older than they are, and we're struggling on some of those hikes. So my clients came back and said, can we plan to take more of those trips now? And we can always work a little bit longer if we have to. They're both in medical, they're nurses. And they said, you know what? Nurses are in high demand. We feel like we can probably get a job anywhere we go. And if we come back to it later, we can, but we want to go hiking now.
Yeah, I love that. I think I've seen all kinds of things. I've seen a lot of people, particularly in the medical field, as your situation you just described, where they do have the flexibility to scale down over time and might go from 5 to 4 days and then 3 and then 2. And I absolutely love that. I've seen many others in the corporate world where it's a completely different path. They don't have that flexibility. And so theirs is more of the one day the work, the next day there's not. I do think because of podcasts like yours, Christine Benz's book, How to Retire, has a whole section where she talks with Jamie Hopkins about this, how some people may not, toward the last few years, may not need to contribute as much to their 401k or maximize their savings anymore, and instead use that money to go camping more or take those vacations while they're able. Or maybe it's hiring more help around the house to make the work-life balance feel a little bit more reasonable. I think that's being thought of more, again, because of, all of the media and ability for people to share ideas that we have today.
Most people track their net worth for decades. At what point should they stop obsessing over accumulating assets and start thinking about creating income instead?
I think that's part of that pre-go phase of really realizing that it becomes more around risk management and cash flow certainty. And so we're conditioned to measure everything. I mean, even the requirements in our industry to, produce performance rates of return. Everybody's conditioned to compare based on rate of return. But what you really need is cash flow certainty in retirement. And it's a completely different way of managing risk. There are all kinds of risks that we face. Longevity, living long, is one of the key risks in retirement. And one of my pet peeves, for example, is, when people compare Social Security claiming to other options based on the rate of return you can earn in the market. Well, Social Security claiming can help hedge some very unique risks around living long and inflation protection that other things can't do. And so, Andy, I completely forgot what your original question was. My mind just kind of spiraled.
No, I think you answered it. The question was about, when should they stop thinking about accumulating and focusing more on income?
Yeah, it's in that first 10 years. And if it hasn't happened by then it's those first few years of retirement where you really have to realize, hey, these parameters have changed.
Good pre-go homework. Let's go to segment 2.
Retirement is not a single, unchanging destination. It is a human journey that naturally unfolds in 4 distinct chapters: pre-go, go-go, slow-go, and no-go. Your lifetime spending will not increase in a smooth, predictable straight line. It naturally peaks in your active early retirement years, when energy is high, hits a natural lull in your mid-70s, and spikes later due to medical necessities. Why build a rigid portfolio that ignores these moving seasons? A fiduciary strategy uses a dedicated cash buffer and automated schedules to mimic a reliable corporate paycheck. It matches your assets directly to your changing physical capacity, protecting your peace of mind.
So talk about this idea of 4 distinct phases: pre-go, go-go, slow-go, and no-go. And how did you arrive at that framework?
The framework originally came about in the 90s. There's I believe an advisor who wrote a book. I can't remember the title of it, but I do quote it in my book. And so that's where the original go-go, slow-go, no-go came about. And then as I was thinking about the work we do with clients, this idea of the pre-go phase came about. And really me thinking through how the planning needs, the state of both emotional and financial thinking is different for clients throughout these phases, and how much changes. It used to be like accumulation, and then we're in the cash flow, spending phase, but really it's so much more than that. There's go-go where spending is higher. Then there's slow go, where spending slows down and our physical, maybe even cognitive abilities begin to change. People's concerns about markets conditions are often a lot less. And they may have aging parents that they're dealing with at the same time. And then there's no go, which you really have had to have prepared for earlier on, to be ready for the fact that you are going to need help. You may need help paying bills. You may need someone that you're adding on as a power of attorney for your accounts. And so thinking through how these phases are so vastly different was the inspiration behind the book, and really organizing it in the way that we see it happen with real people.
In your experience, do people have to have more savings for those no-go years than they at first think?
Well, no, I don't think more savings. I think so what we like to do is I will build in what I call rolling go-go spending. So let's say, I have someone who's like, well, could we spend $20,000 a year on vacations, or in some cases, $75,000 a year? Well, if I were to plug that in their plan and increase it with inflation for, the next 30 years, it's going to come back and the metrics aren't going to look good at all. But if I say, well, I think for the next 5 years, you can absolutely spend that. Now, next year, the metrics might still look good. And so we'll keep it going for 5 years. And next year, we might keep it going for 5 years. So by the time we're 10 years in, we've been able to do it every single year through this dynamic process of ongoing testing. But if I had built it in from day one, it wouldn't have looked good. So they didn't need to save more. What they needed to do was shift some of that spending that's likely going to slow down in the no-go years, and see, can we realistically make a plan where we're shifting some of that forward, and of course still preserving enough that you're always going to be okay when you reach those slow and no-go years.
Yeah, I guess the downside of a lot of the retirement calculators that are assuming that you're spending in a straight line, your research shows that that's not the case.
Spending does not happen in a straight line, and we like to use an overall, we call it a fundedness metric. So I think of it like a lifetime 4% rule, where I could plug in, well, people want to go, hey, could we, pay for our daughter's wedding? It's going to be $50,000. Could we help an adult child with a down payment on a house? Could we take this around the world vacation? Or it could simply be, can I spend $10,000 this year on a really cool golf cart that I want to drive around my neighborhood? Well, those aren't ongoing items, but oftentimes we can plug those into the plan, and they work perfectly fine if I'm not following an annual, withdrawal rate metric, if I'm looking at it holistically in terms of how it plays out. Spending is very, very dynamic, and it definitively slows down in almost every household we've ever worked with as they reach their 70s and 80s.
Great insight. I know that you described creating what amounts to a paycheck in retirement. How does one do that, and how does that simple shift help retirees to feel more confident about spending money?
Yeah, we recently had someone come in. Now, we work with households all across the U.S., but they were visiting Scottsdale. They don't live in Arizona, and asked if they could meet with me. And so they work with one of our planners. And I said, so why did you hire us? And they said, we knew we would never spend our money. We needed that paycheck. And they just knew if left to themselves, they just wouldn't draw money out. And so the concept is knowing yourself. And I really like the idea of setting up direct deposits. It's easy if you were to have one investment account and you're structuring the investment. So there's enough cash at the beginning of the year. Let's just say you need $5,000 a month. So there's $60,000 in a money market, and you're direct depositing that to your working paycheck every single month at $5,000. It's replicating your paycheck. So our goal is always to look at somebody's paycheck, if they're a W-2 earner, and go, what's your after-tax take home? And so the next month after you retire, can you still have that consistent after-tax income being direct deposited so that it's familiar, it's the same way you're used to spending, and so that you keep spending it. When you have accounts all over the place, as you know, Andy, it gets more complicated. You have a Roth IRA, and you have IRAs and 401ks and deferred comp. It's a lot more coordinating to figure out how to turn all of that into a simplified direct deposit paycheck, but it can be done. And I think it's very useful in helping people budget and plan and making sure that they are spending what they're able to.
I forget to realize the psychological impact that can have. It makes a lot of sense. And automation makes that so easy today. We have so many clients that, they're taking their required minimum distribution from their IRA account, but then even their taxable account, they can set up, monthly distributions that are coming through almost like a paycheck. And I guess it just feels so familiar.
Yeah.
It takes some of the guesswork out. You feel comfortable.
Yeah, it does. And, even with RMDs, a lot of times we'll take those out. We consolidate everything into a holding account. So there might be cash flow coming from 3 or 4 different account types, and we're consolidating it all and then sending one direct deposit to them so that it feels like it felt when they were working. So it's more budgetable, if that's even a word. It's more manageable. It just makes it easy.
Yeah, I love that. Do you think that there is one of the 4 phases that people tend to prepare the least for?
Absolutely. The no-go phase. I think we talk about long-term care expenses. So mentally people want to have enough finances in place to potentially cover that cost. I think that's probably not as big of a worry as how are these things actually going to get managed? And I have a situation years ago with a client that was helping their parents. One parent ended up in the hospital while they were trying to help that parent. They were at home with the other parent going through the bills. And during all of that, they realized a life insurance payment had been missed and that life insurance policy expired. And they were not able to reinstate it. And, the spouse in the hospital passed shortly thereafter. And there was really nothing they could do because it was chaotic and they just, hadn't kept up on that. And so when I think about that no-go phase, we've had many times where we were able to suggest that a client bring in an adult child, the person who was named as their executor or successor trustee in the strong family relationships. That usually works well, and bring them in now and get them on the accounts and get the proper authority set up so that when that time comes, everything's in place. What we see happen sometimes is those things aren't in place. Even if someone has a durable power of attorney, most financial institutions today can't accept that document. They need their own form signed. And so you want to have that in place and be aware of how the actual mechanics of having someone help you work. That's not proper English either, but you got the gist of it. And be prepared for accepting help. No, none of us want to lose our independence. But we do need to mentally prepare for that shift of I am going to need help one day, and who is, are the people, or can I hire a service? Like, what's that going to look like for me?
Yep. Having a proper plan really does help in each stage along the way. Let's bring it home and go to the last segment.
The hardest part of achieving wealth isn't the math. It is the psychological barrier of turning off the accumulation switch. Decades of disciplined saving can leave your nervous system trapped in a chronic scarcity mindset, mistaking money hoarding for genuine safety. You end up over-accumulating and under-living, terrified of running out. But a successful life is about maximizing human experiences, not dying with the biggest balance sheet. By building individual fixed income runways, you establish a visible multi-year cushion. This practical protection gives you the confidence to deploy your capital when its personal impact is highest, transforming your hard-earned wealth into true freedom.
Dana, you write that one of the hardest parts of retirement is not building wealth. It's giving yourself permission to spend it. Why is that transition so difficult?
It's, it is hardwired into our nervous system, I think, of we've been conditioned from a young age, the media messages around wealth and tying that to freedom, watching our net worth go up, watching our account balances go up, tracking our rates of return, comparing it to the S&P 500. I think just that shift of, realizing that what was this all for? One of the best ways of framing that I like to think of is either you're going to choose how it's spent or someone else is going to decide. And so how are you going to choose? It doesn't mean spending frivolously. And a lot of people, are comfortable. That's how they got to the point where they're at. And so when we talk about their ability to spend, they might say, well, but I'm comfortable. What would I spend it on? And that's doing some of that deep work that Dr. Jordan talked about of, what are the things that are going to be meaningful, that are going to give you purpose, or that are going to help other people that you can do? Because ultimately that money is going to pass along to someone and someone else is going to decide. And so how do you give yourself permission to make those choices?
You've worked with professionals who have enough financially, but they still worry about running out of money. How do you help someone overcome that fear?
Lots of number crunching in some cases. I often tell the story of a client I worked with. They were very financially savvy, and the year they retired, they came in 8 times and wanted to run every possible contingency. Now, turns out they ended up retiring in December 2007, which was retiring into one of the worst markets we've had in modern history. And it was very scary, but they knew their plan was solid because we had done all of the stress testing and they had looked at it so many times. And so sometimes that's the answer. Other times, literally, we've just said, look, we're going to start sending you money. I had one client where I was like, look, I'm going to start direct depositing $3,000 a month, which was, well within what they could withdraw, just so that you can see that this will work and your balances aren't going to start dropping off a cliff. And that helped them get over that hurdle. It's meeting everybody where they're at. Everybody has perhaps different and personal reasons for where that fear is coming from. And so understanding and working through what those reasons are and helping people see that they will be okay. That's what it's all about.
How frequently are you doing something like that, sending money to the client's account, or just creating a visible cash flow runway so that they see several years of income laid out ahead of time, and it really gives them confidence?
Yeah, I mean, every time. So we run our whole practice based on a cash flow plan. And I share an example of that in the book that's framing where the spending is going to come from and using a reasonable conservative set of assumptions, how the account balances are likely to play out over time. And so every single time we are updating their cash flow plan and showing them visually what that looks like. I think that is critical to reaching that level of confidence of really seeing it all laid out, not using 10% returns. That's not going to work. You were usually projecting at a 5% rate of return and a 3% inflation rate so that people can see these are very realistic and conservative set of modeling assumptions that we use. And even with these assumptions, here's what your financial trajectory path is likely to look like. Here's the annual after-tax cash flow, which is what people really need to know. What is it that I have to spend on a monthly basis? Let's lay that out. Let's show you how it is going up with inflation and that your account balances aren't going to be dropping off a cliff. That visual element, I think, is really important.
Yeah, going back to your client who retired in December of 2007.
7, yeah.
Yeah. Share what happened, because I think that's relatable, right? Somebody who's worried and they kept coming in to see you because they wanted to stress test the plan a million different ways. And then the worst case scenario actually happened. So can you share how that client finally made the emotional transition from accumulating wealth to truly enjoying it, even through those darkest days?
Yeah, and it wasn't just that client, it was multiple clients at that time that retired around then. And I had laid out a chart where I had stress tested against the early 70s and shown people, like, here's what would have happened to your account balances if you retired here. Generally around 68, 1970 is one of the worst historical times. So I had showed every single client had seen that at that time. And so I had many come back and say, wow, like, because you showed us that, we're able to stick with our plan. We were never, I'm not sure if you can hear that, but I don't know how to make my ringer stop, Andy. So my apologies. Every single client had seen this kind of path. And so we weren't pretending that these market downturns are never going to happen. We weren't saying, oh, you're absolutely going to earn, this rate of return every single year. Instead, we were saying, look, here's real life. Here's what's happened in the past. Here's the worst 1/3 of market history. And let's stress test against that so you can see that this plan and this withdrawal amount would work anyway.
That's great. That's powerful. Dana, before we wrap up, I'd love to leave our audience with one final thought. If someone remembers just one idea from today's conversation or from reading Living Off Your Acorns, what do you hope that is?
It's that retirement is not one homogenous phase. We're geared toward goals, and retirement is a goal, but there's so much more after. You're going to continue to evolve in the way you're thinking, in the various emotional shifts that you will go throughout these phases, and simply stepping back and having some awareness of what that might look like for the next 20 or 30 years can really make the whole experience, I think, easier to manage.
Dana, thank you again for joining us. Congratulations on Living Off Your Acorns. Is that your third book?
In a sense, it is. Yes, I have Control Your Retirement Destiny, and then I produced a course with the great courses called How to Plan for the Perfect Retirement. I also had a book on Social Security, so I suppose we could almost call it the fourth book.
Okay, we will almost call it a fourth book. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today. If today's conversation resonated with you, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of Living Off Your Acorns. And if you'd like to learn more about Dana's work, be sure to visit sensiblemoney.com for additional retirement planning resources. And thank you for spending this time with us. My favorite inspired money moment today is that retirement is not about reaching a number. It's about having the freedom to live life on your terms. So one thing that I want to suggest that you do this week, set aside one uninterrupted hour, not to review your investments, but to think about your future. Based on our conversation today, ask yourself, what do I want my life to look like in retirement? Who do I want to spend it with? What experiences matter most? Because when you're clear about the life that you want to live, building the financial plan to support it becomes much easier. Inspired Money Makers, if you enjoyed today's episode, please like this video, subscribe to the Inspired Money YouTube channel, share this conversation with someone who is planning for retirement, and leave a comment below with your biggest takeaway. Let's stay connected. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Advisor Andy. If you're listening to the show and there's no place to put a comment, you can message me with your biggest takeaway. A big thank you to the Inspired Money team, Bradley, John Eaglefeather, and Chad Lawrence, for helping to bring conversations like this to life. This is Inspired Money, where we make more, give more, and live more. Until next time, do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens. Thanks, everyone.